I mean, I could be wrong, but I think the flag inside the house.
So you don't have to say, I know it happens. You got it down to a routine.
You don't have to see the flag
Yeah.
inside the house.
You said this is the day
There was a bigger chapter here that just talked about the.
one day for every day. Oh, see how that works? Yeah, you-
Well, welcome everybody. I like to start on time. We're like 1 minute early, but let's start now. And obviously we want to start with prayer. So Heavenly Father, we ask you to guide our thoughts, our words, our understanding as we try to understand the events of the end times according to Jesus. We ask this in your name. Amen. Well, thank you for coming. I do so sincerely appreciate it. But I should put on my microphone. All right. All right. There we go. All right. So, today, we're going to talk about time and eternity, specifically in terms of the first century. But before I actually get into that, do we have any questions from last week? Any leftovers? Any leftovers from last week? Because I have some, okay, that I wanted to bring up. Things which I don't think I adequately addressed. Okay, the first thing is, do you recall that I made the very bold statement that I can prove the existence of God by holding up a dry marker? In other words, this is sufficient evidence for the existence of God. What is this man talking about? What is he talking about? Nothing is self-existent except God. So for this to exist, and I think we're all in agreement that it exists, for this to exist, ergo, therefore, it means that we have to have a pre-existent, uncreated, sufficient in himself, creator. So nothing would come, this didn't pop into the world by itself. Now granted there was a manufacturer, but that doesn't change anything. It's still the fact that it exists. You remember we talked about our friend Rene Descartes? And Rene, that's a boy's name actually, Rene was always doubting things. And he said, how can I even prove that I exist? Have you ever wondered if you yourself exist? Well, okay, no, that's happened. But Rene did. So he says, I doubt that I'm even in existence. How can I prove to myself that I exist? And he says, but the very fact that I'm thinking about this proves that I exist. And he says, cogito ergo sum, which means, my Latin scholar.
I'll stop it.
Cogito?
I think therefore I am.
Okay.
It doesn't mean oh, stop it.
It doesn't mean I'll stop it. I asked him, I said, are you going to call me today for Latin translations? And he said
Well,
no.
she took more Latin than I did. And her Latin's good. Anyway, so let's get into that. So one of the things I didn't think I really adequately addressed was the idea of his existence per, let's say, Rene. The other thing which was asked, and I think it came from the back corner of the room, and I ran overtime, it was a question about the intermediate state. In other words, between the time that we die and the time of the general resurrection. Where are we? Okay, let me, honey, would you see that Ron and the new folks have handouts? Okay, so the question is, between death and the general resurrection, where are we? Well, first of all, we do exist, but exist where? There's two schools of thought on that. One is that we go into what's called soul sleep, just fall asleep, and we wake up at the general resurrection. That's not necessarily the major viewpoint. The major viewpoint is one of continual consciousness, albeit without a body, so that we would say die, and yet still be present, still be conscious, still have awareness. And we can look to Scripture for that. We can talk about the good thief. Jesus said to him, today you'll be with me in paradise. You'll be with me. We got Lazarus, and I think his name is Dives, D-I-V-E-S. And again, a parable or a story, present time. So, in other words, Lazarus and this other fellow are alive, and they're conscious. So, therefore, to answer your question as best I can, and I don't want to enter into heresy, but I believe that the continuing conscious viewpoint is the one that is correct. So, those, to me, were two things that I didn't think were adequately addressed. Were there other things that you wanted to talk about now that we're starting up? Okay. All right. Very good. I was not pleased with the quality of the video from last week. It was the first time I did YouTube, and I was making mistakes left and right, which I think we now have addressed. Okay, I think they're addressed. So today, talking about time and eternity, and we're particularly focused on the first century. The first century is, in fact, the first century. This is a major, it's a dividing point. We divide time into BC and AD. And have you noticed something when you see the dates? What does AD stand for? Anybody? Correct. The year of the Lord. But are they currently calling it that everywhere? What's the new term?
Current era.
Current era. They call it CE. What's the problem? Don't you want to give the Lord some credit? Apparently not. And if it's BC, it stands for before Christ, but no more. Now it's BCE, before the current era. Okay, not happy with that, but you know.
But it's even become more complicated because now BC is before COVID.
Oh,
Yes. Okay, so I'm following Sproul's book, and like I said last week, I greatly admire his theology, his presentation. But let's do this first. When I was 18, and I was 17 when I went off to college. I just turned 18 in my final months of being there in freshman year. And I came from a very solid religious training. And I tell you what, the experience of the university blew me away. And that's a Catholic college. It blew me away. Now, maybe that's what universities are meant to do. Maybe they're meant to make you think. But it did. So I remember wandering around campus, and that's, by myself, and I'm saying, again, I have this existence, this existential problem. And the question I kept asking is, why should anything exist? Why? Why should it? Because the natural state would be nothingness. And again, like I mentioned last week, nothing is not just blackness. It's non-existence. And I would can we comprehend non-existence? No. To me, it's incomprehensible. So from something that is incomprehensibly non-existent, we have existence. How? Why? It's not even so much a question of how. I was really more concerned with that why question. Why nothing should exist? Okay, so a little bit of Latin, and I will not ask Sylvie to translate, although I know you can.
Well, that's from the music. Nothing comes from nothing. Nothing ever could.
That's right.
Somewhere in
Ex nihilo nil fit. From nothingness, nothing comes. Nothing comes from nothing. And see, Maria sung that to the captain in Sound of Music. Remember that? Okay. Nothing comes from nothing. Nothing ever could. Ex nihilo nil fit. Nothing comes from nothing. Oops, wrong way. Okay, so we have two ways of looking at existence. Ex nihilo nil fit, or eternum non creates. Eternally, no creation. Okay? Well, so the secular humanists, I spend a lot of time with the secular humanists. Now, their view is different from ours. They say, first of all, everything always was. that this is always here. Okay, it's a little bit hard to accept, but they say it's been always there. And they understand that the universe expands. Well, how far can you stretch it before it snaps back? So they have this theory of a universe which expands and then a universe which contracts infinitely throughout eternity. Okay, and to make matters worse, currently there's a theory called the multiverse. Multiverse. This one's really strange, okay? Because, and that's unproven, by the way, but the theory is that every moment, another universe comes out of the one that exists. So presently, they're saying we got 10 to the 500 power. To give you an idea how big that is, 10 to the 64th is more electrons in the known universe. So you have a 10 with 500 zeros after it. I don't know. So these are leftovers from last week.
And Bud, in each of these different universes, is there one of us, or are
Yeah, we have one. We're one of them.
We're in one universe.
No, we're in all of them.
We're in all.
We're in all of them. But you see, every decision you made or didn't make changed the universe. So, the universe where you bought a Chevy instead of a Ford is in that one. Every decision that we make, that anyone makes, changes everything. Okay? But we're in it. That's the
You
thing.
mean we're in all the universes?
We would be in all, and I don't even know, there's not even a number for that. But, yeah, we're in all of them.
How?
Well, I don't know, because they said so.
So the idea is, this gets into predetermination, that when we come up with a choice, God's plan is not necessarily that you're going to do exactly these things, but that at every juncture, there's possibilities. You could go left or you could go right.
Mm-hmm.
And God knows that those are the choices. And every one of those is then going to lead into other possibilities, which is going to lead into other possibilities. And that's where you get into this multiple universes of following each trajectory to its conclusion. That's different than predestination. It's predetermination. Predestination was, God said, it's good, and we sinned. And God continues to offer grace and opportunity for us to come back to God.
Right? 10 to the 500 power is a number that's incomprehensible. Okay, these guys gave me a lot of trouble back when I was in college. Okay? And they're all secular humanists, and they're all atheists, and none of them had an answer for me that I wanted. And the answer is why. Explain to me why, and they could not. Because Yahweh is the great I am. He has existence in himself. These guys, and maybe you recognize Marx there, David Hume in the lower corner, Nietzsche, Steve Hawking, and of course, Charles Darwin. Charles Darwin really does damage to the current 20th century thinking, 21st, and Freud. Okay, so secular humanism, agnostics, atheists, rationalists, skeptics, but they find, and what I have highlighted there, is their feeling on the matter. Insufficient evidence for the claim that some divine purpose exists for the universe. In other words, secular, meaning worldly, humanists, okay? That the world in itself has sufficient answer for us. They reject the idea that God has intervened in history, or that he can claim salvation and redemption for sinners. And they say, and this is from their material, you cannot look to some transient being for salvation. And finally, they say, we reject the divinity of Jesus and other prophets. So my question is rhetorical. No, it's not rhetorical, it's a real question. Can a Christian also be a secular humanist? What do you think? Can a Christian be a secular humanist? Now okay, let me soften that a little bit. There's a lot to be said for humanism. Okay? But it's different from the secular humanist. This is, how should I say, humanism can be a good thing, but it can be taken to an extreme that rejects everything that is not human. Okay, my feeling is no. You cannot be two things at once. You cannot be rejecting the divinity of Jesus and at the same time claiming that you're a full-fledged secular humanist. Now, you might be somewhat in between, but okay. So, ontologically, remember what this was. This is the study of being. The Christian says, nothing comes from nothing. But the secular humanist says eternally non-created. Everything is eternally non-created. It is and always has been. And this is interesting. Nothing can ever come from nothing. We just said that. But the secular humanist says nothing, non-existence, can produce something. Just give it enough time. Just give non-existence enough time, it will become existence. I don't think so. Creatio ex nihilo, by divine fiat. In other words, the Lord called into being, let there be, Genesis 1:1. And they say, eternally, not created, eternally was. Okay, matter is not eternal. It had a point of creation, and it has a point of consummation. They say matter is eternal. Okay. So, theologically, not theologically, that is to say, it's about purpose. What's the purpose? Remember I talked about the Baltimore Catechism. Question 1. Why did God make you? No, who made you? God made me. Question 2. Why? To know, love, and serve Him in this world, be happy with Him in the next. Secular, no purpose, anything. So, Shakespeare has the answer in Macbeth. A tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. Okay, that's what life's all about. So here's the thing. What if, just say, what if these guys are all right? What if they're right? And there is no God. What does that mean? What does that mean? Any thoughts on that? Any thoughts? Because they think they're right. There's a whole bunch of people. As a matter of fact, secular humanism is the predominant world view. We are in the minority. Okay? We're in the minority. Okay.
I would think if God does not exist, then where is our value?
We have no value. See, go back to Macbeth. Sound and fury. Ron.
But that's kind of what I was thinking. I've thought about that a lot over the years. And I've had discussions with atheists. And I've always asked them, if there is no God and there is nothing after this life, I always said it that way so that would not take us off the subject, but nothing after this life, then why be good to people? Why be bad to people? Why do anything that we do if this is all there is?
And you're accountable to no one.
Yeah.
So why not?
Yeah, so,
And I think that explains a lot of things that go on in this world. With no accountability, ultimately, all things are possible, probable, allowable. So then you have scenes like this. This to me is despair. This is despair. A weeping angel statue. A cemetery that looks like it needs a little bit of a touch-up. Cemeteries are places, or can be, places of despair. And I talked just last week about the Raven. Remember the Raven and Edgar Allan Poe? All the important women in his life are dying, and he's in despair. And he says, will I ever see my sweet Lenore again? That's his girlfriend's name. Raven flies into his room, and the Raven sits on top of a bust of Pallas and says, nevermore. And the person keeps asking the Raven a question. Will there be no balm in Gilead? Nevermore. Nevermore.
So, Bud, before you get beyond this, we have a columbarium here. How can we make it focused on faith, on the resurrection, rather than being a cemetery?
Well, okay, and that came up actually too That was one of the questions. So the question is, really, are we being resuscitated? Are we being put back together? If we go to a cemetery, what's there? Okay, if we were to dig any of those graves up, and these have been there for a good while, what are you going to find? Probably not a whole lot. The longer you go in time, the less there's going to be there. So it's not a case where God has to say, I wish I had all the parts, I could put them back together. Remember I said, he has the blueprint. He made us in the first place, he can make us a second time. And he's going to make us better anyhow. So it's not a matter of being sure we have the parts to put back together, because we don't, or won't. You know, we will be in a glorified body, a better body. And I can assure you that any bodies that we dig up here are not going to be in a very good shape. As a matter of fact,
we've taken it a step further. We've taken it a step further because the body's already cremated.
Correct.
So all that's there is ashes. But the fact of the matter is we are going to die.
yes,
And we believe in a resurrection.
exactly.
So how do we have the focus on the resurrection? We have the statue of ascension out there. We have the cross. But we also have a lot of names on the plaques.
Yes.
How do we have the focus on the resurrection rather than on death and loss?
I'm not sure I would know what to say, you know, other than our focus is on the cross. We preach Christ crucified and raised. The columbarium to me is not an obstacle. As a matter of fact, I think the discussion was, what about cremation? And obviously by the fact that we have a columbarium means that the Reformed theology, Valley Presbyterian, has come to peace with cremation, or else we wouldn't have that.
It was very controversial when it was put in. The irony is that those who were the most against it are now interred there. But in the Catholic Church, only during Benedict did the Catholic Church come to accept cremation.
Right. And it is very recent for them. And as a matter of fact, one of the ways that you could guarantee a person not to rise again was to burn their body and throw it into the river. And that's what they did with Wycliffe, I believe.
But the issue has always been for me, especially when I was talking to Catholics years ago about their lack of belief in cremation. If you believe that God is all powerful, how can you not believe that he can resurrect you without a body from ashes? I mean, it made no sense to me. And so if you believe God is all powerful and can do anything, then being cremated is not a big deal.
I see it as simply the dissolution
land.
to dust, speed it up. And again, God has the blueprint. He can make you again, right? He knew how to make Ron in the first place. He can make Ron in the second place. Yeah. I'm not worried about that. The other thing we talked about is, will we recognize each other in heaven, you know, and not without a name tag. Okay, so, let's talk about this. Before we can talk about the second coming, there are critics that say that Jesus never came in the first place. Okay? One proponent, David Fitzgerald, he's a self-described atheist activist, and he wrote a book called Nailed. Okay? And in Amazon, they have the book description. So this is his description. Why would anyone think Jesus never existed? It is perfectly reasonable to accept that he was a real first century figure. As it turns out, no. Jesus Christ, I'm going to skip down, created solely through allegorical alchemy of hope and imagination, in short, a purely mythical Christ. So he had 10 points, and I'm not going to cover all 10 points. I'll cover the main one. 1, no first century secular evidence whatsoever exists to support the actuality of Yeshua ben Yosef. And the question was, what sorts of things do pagan authors from the time of Jesus have to say about him? He answers, they say nothing. But we are good students of the Word. What I have his book right there. Who wrote about Jesus almost right away after his death? And you have his book too, so I'm going to ask you, who did it?
Josephus.
Josephus, correct. Josephus wrote about him. Now, in a way, thank you, Lord, for Josephus, because he has recorded in 6-point font and for hundreds of pages the history of the Jews. And I'll just read one paragraph. This is from the Antiquities of the Jews. Now, there was about this time Jesus, a wise man, if it be lawful to call him a man, for he was a doer of wonderful works, a teacher of such men as received the truth with pleasure. He drew over to himself both many of the Jews and many of the Gentiles. He was the Christ. And when Pilate, at the suggestion of the principal men among us, had condemned him to the cross, those that loved him at first did not forsake him, for he appeared to them alive again the third day, as the divine prophets foretold these and 10,000 other wonderful things concerning him. And the tribe of Christians, so named from him, are not extinct to this day. Josephus is not a Christian. He wrote that, as a matter of fact, he was born around AD 37. But his record of the Jewish history is fantastic. So the question, he says, from Jesus' time, what do they have to say? They have nothing to say. That's not true. Not just Josephus. There he is. Really kind of needs a nose job, but all right. Suetonius, another one. He's mentioned in his biography of Nero. And he talks about the Christians among those punished during Nero's reign. And what was the deal with Nero and the Christians? He blamed them for the fire of Rome. How about Tacitus? Tacitus' reference to the execution of Jesus by Pilate is both authentic and of historical value as an independent Roman source. Pliny the Younger, wrote a letter to Emperor Trajan and asked for counsel on dealing with the early Christian community. All right, second point. He says, no surviving inscription on stone, da 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 da. Are there any inscriptions on stone from the 1st century? Does anybody recognize this? That is Alexamenos. Alexamenos. Okay. This is a graffiti caricature. And on the left, this is how it actually looks. It's scratched into plaster. Okay, scratched into plaster. But in order so we can understand it a little bit better, there it is without the plaster. And it shows Alexamenos. That's him there. Looks like he's wearing a necktie, but he's not. And he's worshiping a figure on a cross with a donkey head. Okay? That, it was one of the ways in which the Romans mocked Jews, by the way, with donkey heads. And if you read carefully, you can see Alexamenos celebete Theo, his God. And it reads then that Alexamenos worships his God. Now he's being mocked for this. Well, the thing is, where exactly is this piece of plaster? It turns out that the Emperor Caligula had a school for pages, young boys to be working around. And this was found in the dormitory of the Caligula training center. Well, Alexamenos then is proof that there are inscriptions in stone from this period. It takes a little bit of looking to see the what's happening. It almost looks to our modern eyes like Alexamenos is making fun, but he's not, because the words say he's worshiping his God. All right? Any questions about this? Anybody ever seen this before? Moreover, okay, remember, this is a dormitory, and the year is, I believe, well, Caligula was emperor from 37 to 41. Okay, so let's take the early date, 37. Jesus died in 33. 4 years later, the knowledge of the faith has spread now to the very imperial palace. There it is. Okay? 4 years. It's now in the imperial palace. But that's not the only piece of evidence we have. We go, there's a second one, and I don't have a picture of it, but it's in the same complex. And it says, Alexamenos is faithful. Somebody thought they were going to mock him by saying he's faithful. So whoever this kid is, and he's going to be a young man, he's faithful, and he worships God on a cross. Okay?
So, Bud,
Yes.
I get the image of the figure on the cross, but who does Alexamenos represent?
Well, he represents himself. He was just one person. But he could represent all the people. But the question that Nails has, he says, is there any physical proof?
I get that. I'm just, as they're representing it, clearly the one figure is
Of course.
Christ being crucified.
He's a representative of all the other believers that are there. You know, and the thing is, to mock somebody means that they already have significance. Okay? So you don't mock somebody who has no significance. Somebody noticed that Alexamenos was faithful, and also that he's worshiping. And in context, donkey heads were how the Jews distributed the Jews. All right, moving on. So what I have here is the 1st century. And for all purposes, we start at 19 BC and end in 70 AD. So it's really not like we do from, go from 1 to 100. Because the important events are this. If you had a chance to click on today's video about the construction of the temple, it's in the e-blast. This is when it began. It took up to, I think, around AD 46 to complete. But it began here. So we're starting our timeline with the construction of the second temple. Now, question is, though, what about Jesus? We have a couple of, okay, I'm going to do that. It's a little bit out of order. Let's do this, and I'll come back to the crucifixion. When was Jesus born? There is no year 0. There is no December 25th in the year 0. Instead, we look to the people and when they died. Okay, you remember the Christmas story very well. I can repeat it. Angel appears to Joseph, tells him to flee with his family to Egypt unto Herod the Great, not so great, died. You remember that? Mm-hmm. And what was happening? The Magi come into town, and they say to Herod, where is this king of the Jews been born? We understand he's been born in Bethlehem. Will you point us in the right direction? And what does Herod say? Yes, I will, and I will go and worship with you. Mm-hmm. What happens next in the story? What happens next? Did Herod go and worship Jesus? No. He slaughtered all the babies, all the male babies that were under 2 years old and under. Because he asked the Magi, when did you see the star? And they figured it's been 2 years. So, Herod dies in 1 BC. We have that documented. He killed babies 2 years old and under. So the flight to Egypt would have occurred in 3 BC. We don't know that for sure, but it's probable. Okay? Probable that Jesus was born around 3 BC. If he was born in the AD, in other words, here with year 1 or 0, that would have been too late to accommodate the death of Herod. So there's still controversy. We don't know exactly when Jesus was born. So how did we get all the Christmas stuff going on? What's that all about? Where did Christmas trees come from? Came from Martin Luther. Martin Luther started that. Yeah. And all the other stuff, the red, the green, okay? Oops, I hit the button. So, all of that was from Rome. That was the Saturnalia, the festival that celebrates December 25th, because when is the winter solstice? When is that? 21st. So they say, okay, let's wait a couple days. Okay, the sun is turning positive, turning around. Sol invictus, the sun invincible. All right. So Jesus then is born 3 BC, right there. We showed this on another occasion. The Jewish calendar is different from ours. We will refer to this from time to time. I Googled, you know what, I better go back a little bit. No, I better go forward. So I Googled this question. Why do Jews today don't believe in Jesus? There are a good many of them that don't. So why do they say? Well, first of all, there are many Jews today who do believe in Jesus. Yeshua HaMashiach. Remember that? Yeah, that's my earlier course. Those are Messianic Jews. And there's a bunch of them. As a matter of fact, they have, if you Google map them, they have meeting places around here. So a Messianic Jew believes in Jesus, all the while holding on to a lot of their traditions and so forth. But they're still in a minority. Why don't they believe in Jesus? They said Jesus did not fulfill Messianic prophecies. I think he did, but they say he didn't. Well, I don't know. I like to think of it like this. If just, oops, I have a little button there. So if this is, say like Bethlehem, and this is Calvary, then we have all these dots that lead up to it. See, we have all these prophetic words leading up to the birth of Jesus, and I say, you guys didn't connect the dots. There was one guy who did. Anybody venture? The one who came to Jesus at night?
Oh, Nicodemus.
Nicodemus. See, Nicodemus was a Pharisee, which, and Nicodemus comes to Jesus at night. I can't draw a straight line. And he says, you are the Christ. But he was the only one. The dots are out there. So the Jews today say he didn't fulfill Messianic prophecies. Number 2, he did not embody the personal qualifications of the Messiah. What were they? What was Jesus always doing on the Sabbath? The pesky thing about healing people, feeding, doing stuff like that. In other words, he said that the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So he was doing all these things that were non-expectations of the Messiah. Who did he eat and drink with? Taxpayers? Not taxpayers, I'm sorry. Tax collectors. Tax collectors and loose women. Okay? Tax collectors and loose women. He goes into town and he sees Zacchaeus up in a tree. Now Zacchaeus is a tax collector. And he says, "Come, Zacchaeus, come on down. I want to have dinner with you." And Zacchaeus comes down. So they don't like that. They don't like the fact that Jesus was doing all these non-messianic type of things. They expected something else entirely. Then they'll say, well, verses referring to Jesus are mistranslations. And finally in this, Jewish belief is based on national revelation. And what they mean by that is if God is going to reveal something, he will reveal it to the nation at once. And where did they get that from? They got it from Mount Sinai. The nations gathered at the foot of Mount Sinai. Here comes Moses, and everybody gets to see exactly what's up. 10 Commandments, people, and there they are. So they expect that when Jesus is revealed, the true Messiah is revealed, this will be a national revelation, not a personal one. All right, so that's why they don't believe today. We know that on our timeline, Jesus died. I'll put it about here. This is 4:33 p.m. Okay. Why then? How do we know then? 4:33. Well, in order for us to fix a date, a number of people have to be alive at the same time, or not alive. Okay? We have Caiaphas, we have Pilate, we have Tiberius Caesar, and so forth. So the range of time had to be between AD 29 and AD 36. So we got this window now. It has to be crucified on a Friday. And the Friday has to be before Passover. Now, in that time frame, there are two possible dates. April 7th in the year 30, or April 3rd in the year 33. But the scripture tells us that Jesus celebrated 3 Passovers. Okay, there they are, John 2:13, John 6:4, and John 11:55. That means that Jesus' ministry had to last more than 3 years. And if that's the case, AD 30 is out. Matthew, Mark, Luke say he died at the 9th hour. The 9th hour is 3 p.m. But what else is going on at the 9th hour on the Friday before Passover?
All the lambs are being
The slaughter of the lambs. And again, how many lambs were there? At least 250,000. 250,000 lambs. Probably more. How do we know? And okay, so 250,000 lambs. Josephus again gives us the information. So let's consider. Is there anything else, I ask? That's the lamb slaughtered 3 p.m. Now you recall from the scripture, Jesus gave up his spirit at 3 p.m. And they were puzzled. Said, why is he already dead? Once 3 p.m. came, and once the knives started to go for the lambs, the Lamb of God, Agnus Dei, gave up his spirit. So that we have this confluence of God's plan and man's sacrifice. Well, we need more evidence. There was, Acts 2:20 says, quoting Joel, the sun will be turned to darkness and the blood to moon before the coming of the great and glorious day of the Lord. When did that happen? A lunar eclipse, April 3rd, 33. Right there. Magnitude 60%. Okay, I like that. The veil is torn. The veil is torn. But notice Matthew 27 says the temple veil is rent in two from the top to the bottom. Top to the bottom. And the earth did quake and the rocks rent. Earthquake. But here's the thing. We would expect the veil to rip from the bottom up because we have a separation of the floor. But instead it's from top down. Was there such an earthquake? NBC News, no fan of conservative Christians, I would say. Quake reveals the day of Jesus' crucifixion. It occurred on Friday, April 3rd, in the year 33. They based their conclusion on a review of seismic activity. All right, so what's the evidence now? We got the evidence from biographies, from the dates that people lived, from the earthquake, from the lunar eclipse, and so forth. So April 3rd, 33, 3 p.m. That is another time anchor for the first century. Any questions about that? Okay. You feel free. Okay. This comes from an earlier course. Everything happened on Nisan 14. It's easy to mispronounce that like a car. It's not a car. It's not a Nissan. It's a Nissan. And it happened on that particular Thursday rolling into Friday. Because for the Jews to begin sundown to sundown. So here we are, the Garden of Gethsemane, the betrayal, the arrest, that takes place in the evening. It goes into the next day. It goes into the morning. Crucified 9 a.m. It is finished 3 p.m. Okay? Nisan 14. Nisan 16, however. Nisan 16, that's Resurrection Day. Josephus tells us that too. He actually names the dates, and he says that the crucifixion took place AD 33, April 3rd, and the resurrection on April 5th. Okay. So, in terms of time and space, this is real. This is what happened. Okay, this is the temple. This is Herod's temple. Okay, now, Herod's temple was completed, they say, 62 to 64. But in terms of usability, I mean, it was usable even before it was complete. Destroyed in 70. You have to watch that video on how they built this. The thing is amazing, amazing. 162 columns, each column in one piece, and it took 3 men to stretch your arms around to enclose the circumference. The place is immense, immense. They looked at that as a building that would never fall. Remember they asked Jesus, Jesus, you see that building? Do you see that building? And Jesus says, I tell you the truth, I'm paraphrasing, not one stone will be left upon another that is not torn down. How? How does that happen? Well, here's how it happens. They made it out of limestone. And limestone is good stuff until it gets superheated, and then it crumbles. So a fire would cause the limestone to crumble. And plus, they have, I don't know if you can see on top, they have gold on top, and gold doors, and gold inside. And when there was this fire, what happens to the gold? Melts. And it gets between the stones. The soldiers say, there's gold there. They pick up the stones, cast it aside, they're getting as much gold as they can from it. So the enemy army took part in the breaking down of the temple. But for the Jews, in their mentality, this would be like the Twin Towers. This to them was to last for 1,000 years. This was it. And when it burnt and it was gone, that was it. What's interesting, Herod's temple is the second temple. The first one was Solomon's. And they built the second temple upon the foundation or the location of the first. They both were destroyed on the same date, the 9th of Ab, either in 586 or 70 AD. Same date. Can there be a third temple? Can there be? Now this comes about a lot in our study of end times. Can there be a third temple? What is the function of the temple?
Sacrifice.
The function of the temple is to be a killing institution, to offer sacrifice. So who believes it's going to be a third temple? The temple was where blood sacrifices were offered. Jesus, the Lamb, was the ultimate sacrifice, and is wholly sufficient. Paul tells us that we are the temple. Yeah. No more buildings. Who believes that there's going to be a third temple? Well, a few non-denominational Bible churches, Baptists, Pentecostals, Assembly of God, Mormons, and charismatic groups who are dispensationalists. And we'll talk about that later. But basically what this does, it creates a problem with the timeline. All right. So, what does Paul have to say about this? Will a third modern temple need to be built? He says in Corinthians, don't you know that you yourselves are God's temple? And that God's Spirit dwells in your midst? Again, in Ephesians 20, built on the foundation of the apostles and prophets, with Christ himself as the chief cornerstone, and so forth and so forth. So Paul is telling us in two places, at the very least, and Hebrews, I believe, would be all over this, in terms of the need for no more temples, because Hebrews is all about that. So the whole point of the temple was animal sacrifice. Remember I just said there was 250,000 lambs would be killed at Passover? Mm-hmm. How much blood does a lamb have? And what do you do with it? Well, let's say, and I'm going to guess, that a lamb has maybe a half a gallon of blood, 2 quarts. So you multiply that by 250,000 lambs. What do you got? Bucket loads and bucket. You have so much blood. They had a system of drainage. But you're looking at blood upon blood upon blood. And, it's impossible under the old covenant for the blood of bulls and goats to take away sin, because they are not human. They can't bear our sin. They didn't do anything. But the blood of Christ, once and for all, Hebrews tells us, done. Sits down at the right hand of God. The new covenant, no more shedding of animal blood. The ultimate bloodshed was Jesus. Let me just skip down to number 4, Nero. And for that, I want to just quickly point us to the handout. And, okay, where are we at? Back page? Yeah, back page. Revelation. Now, our understanding of the end times depends a lot upon these dates. If you ask anybody who's gone through Bible classes and so forth, if you were to say to them, when was Revelation written? They're going to say in 95 AD. However, I will take a minority position and say it was written sooner. Written in 68. And the reason why, much of what is written about the end times kind of requires that physical temple to be there. So people say, well, we don't have that temple, it's gone. So in order to fulfill prophecy, we got to build a third temple. If we understand that Revelation was written earlier than we thought, okay, then if we say 68, the temple was destroyed in 70, you got 2 years. So then it fits. But if you say 95, you're looking back 25 years. And that doesn't work. So then you have to posit a new temple. And to do that, and I'll tell you a little story. My brother-in-law, who is Jewish-ish, in other words, he got sprinkled a little bit, and he says, nothing like not knowing what you're talking about. He says, I know why you Christians are in support of Israel. You want the third temple to be built. And I said, no, we don't want the third temple to be built. We are the temple. But anyway, he thinks that's why we're supporting Israel, because we want that third temple. Nero, much of Revelation, if we look at it, and we will in time, in terms of Nero, then the pieces begin to fit. Okay? Right now we got pieces that don't fit. But we keep Nero in the game, they do fit. For example, and this goes ahead of ourselves a little bit, who has the biblical name or the numerical designation of 666? That is Nero in code. And I'll tell you more about that as we come into it. And so forth. Nero was called the Beast in his contemporary time. So you could have. He was known as the Beast. We see that coming about in Revelation, but that's for another time. But this is really important. This is a minority position, I'll tell you that. You ask almost anybody, they're going to say 95 AD, why do we think it's 95? Because it was a translation of a translation. I think it was Irenaeus in the 100s was translating from someone else who came later. So we don't have it specifically from John that it was 95. We're trying to work the pieces backwards, but Again, I'm a heretic. I'll say not 95. Okay. Notice these guys, and we'll refer to them again. We'll refer to them again in terms of the Revelation. Okay. We'll end with this. What are the various beliefs about what happens after death? Annihilation is one of them. Okay? Gone. Turn off the TV set, it's gone. All the electrons have gone to sleep. That is probably a predominant view among the world, especially among the secular humanists. Turn off the TV. Resurrection. The mortal body is transformed into an immortal one. Now, it's not just Christians who believe that. You go to any funeral. Where's Grandma? She's in heaven. Was Grandma a believer? No, she hated God. But she's going to be there. Resurrection. People say, how do you get to heaven? You die. No. The third way is reincarnation. So with reincarnation, what they believe is this. They believe in a double ellipse, like that, the infinity sign, that keeps going around and around and around. So you talk to a Hindu, and they'll say, well, in the next life, I'll be better. That they're constantly moving towards perfection. I don't know. They don't. But that's a belief among Hindus, among Buddhists. As a matter of fact, I was in London. Well, we were in London, and the cab driver was a Buddhist. And that's what he was saying. Well, next time around, it'll be better for me. Okay. All right, let me stop there. I want to watch that time. I did not last time. I want to do it this time. I don't want to overrun. But what can I talk about? What can we talk about in terms of that first century? Because there's a lot of other stuff that took place. The writing of the New Testament took place in this period. All that, all those books, the John the Baptist, Jesus' ministry, all of that takes place. But the key is this. April 3rd, 3 p.m. in the year 33. Okay, anybody have anything you want to say about that?
Just a comment. Last night I couldn't sleep, so I was surfing the channels, and I stopped on YouTube, and after watching some different things, I came across a YouTube that was titled Paul Harvey Reads a Letter from God.
Okay.
Have you seen it?
No, but I'm familiar with Paul Harvey.
It was interesting to me. It was very interesting, and it actually talks about some of the things you've talked about today. And so I would just suggest, I'm not saying that he got it right 100%, but it is interesting, and of course he reads it as though God is talking to us. And he really does, what he wrote and how he was inspired to write it, I don't know. But he actually answers a question I've always had, and that is, could all the religions be okay? God accepts all of the religions, and he actually addresses that from God's perspective. So it's Paul Harvey Reads Letter from God. If you're interested in it, I found it very interesting the way he approached what God might say if he were to write us a letter.
And Ron, you've set up the question, what's his answer? Can all the religions?
Based on what that letter says, yes, they could. And then that goes against saying what we know as Christians, that you can only get to heaven through Jesus. So there's a problem there, but
So the other piece that comes along with the third temple.
Yeah.
Physically, where would the third temple be built?
The same space.
On the Dome of the Rock.
Same space as the Dome of the Rock.
Right.
The first temple was built on that site. The second temple is built on exactly the same site. It's the same site where Abraham was to have sacrificed Isaac, and gets the lamb, or if you read the Quran, where Abraham sacrificed Ishmael. And it's also the same spot where the crucifixion resurrection